Now, this is a diagram, the BPM lifecycle diagram we've been putting on the board each week. Okay, now as you remember, last week we talked about process discovery in week 2. Now, before we move into process analysis, as part of process discovery, one of the things we do is produce as-is models of the business processes we discover and the ones we decide that we're going to follow and try and improve. And that's what we're about this week. How do we produce an as-is model? In other words, we spend week 3 this week and week 4 next week talking about how to build BPMN diagrams. So, why do we build these things? Okay, we build these things, business process models at various stages, simply so we can understand what it is we're trying to do. Okay, remember, you cannot analyze what we don't understand, and we can't understand it if we can't model it. Okay, so there's a whole lot of reasons for modeling a process, but the chief one amongst all of these is so we can understand and we can share our understanding of the process, the business process itself, with the stakeholders. Now, in order to understand, we have to model these things, and we have to use a language which is understandable by all the stakeholders. Not all stakeholders will have a technical background, so we model these things using something fairly simplistic and something most people will be familiar with. Now, don't forget, we model these processes so we can understand what they're about, and once we understand them, then we can begin to analyze them and then look for issues. Okay, now BPMN is a fairly complex language. There are over 100 symbols we can use in BPMN diagrams, but the best part is that only a very small subset of those symbols allow us to model most of what we want to do. And as we get into more and more complexity, then we can start to use some of the other symbols. So for instance, BPMN, it's based on graphical flowcharts, so something that we've been doing in computer science for quite some time. There's a core set of notational elements, and basically a BPMN process becomes a graph which consists of 4 types of core elements. So first off, there's an activity. Following that, we have an event. Every business process begins with an event and ends with an event. We distinguish between the beginning and the ending event with a normal circle for a start event. So for instance, start event is just a normal circle. And for an ending event, again, it becomes a circle, but a very thick circle, a bolded type circle, if you will. We have a gateway symbol. The gateway symbol is a diamond type shape, and this fulfills a similar sort of role to a decision type thing we see in a flowchart. Basically, the gateway allows us to split a process flow up into multiple flows, or allows us to gather together multiple flows and then exit with a single flow. So we can use to split or to gather up flows. We split previously. And of course, we use an arrow for a sequence flow. Okay, now BPMN by the way, you might notice a couple of pauses while we get used to this Zoom software we're using. Hopefully I'll learn to edit some of these pauses out over time. Okay, now here's an example of a simple order to cash business process model. It's a sequential one, it's not a very complex one, but what you can see is the elements we've been talking about as we did before. So for instance, we begin with an event. So this business process begins when a purchase order is received. Once the purchase order is received, then we proceed in a sequential fashion to all the activities. For instance, confirm order, get shipment, ship product, emit invoice, receive payment, and archive order. And of course, the business process ends with the event order fulfilled. So every business process begins with an event and ends with an event. In the meantime, a number of activities are undertaken, and the arrows represent the process flow. So we move from get shipment to ship product in an orderly sequential fashion. Okay, let's have a quick look at a simple example. So for instance, order to cash. So a typical order to cash process is triggered by the receipt of a purchase order from a customer. The purchase order has to be checked against the stock regarding the availability of the items requested. Depending on stock availability, the purchase order may be confirmed or rejected. If the purchase order is confirmed, an invoice is emitted and the goods requested are shipped. The process completes by archiving the order, or the order may be rejected. Okay, let's have a quick look at an answer to that. So don't forget, it's triggered with the receipt of a purchase order, and it ends when the order is either fulfilled or rejected. So the whole business process begins when a purchase order is received. Therefore, we begin with the start event. Then we check stock availability. We receive a purchase order, we check the stock availability. Two things can happen. Now, here's where we use a gateway. Okay, the gateway thing here is used to split a flow. Check availability into this gateway. Now, two things can happen. Either the items are in stock, in which case we confirm the order, or the items are not in stock, in which case we reject the order. When we reject the order, we end the process with order rejected. Otherwise, if we confirm the order, then we emit the invoice, we ship the goods, we archive the order, and then we end the process. The order is fulfilled. There's a couple of things here we've used which is different. First, the gateway. The gateway is used to split the flow. Basically, we're making a decision. The flow moves into the gateway. Are the items in stock or not in stock? Now, the second major thing here is we have two ending events. We always begin with one start event, but we can have multiple endpoints for a process, in which case our first endpoint is if we reject the order. The second endpoint is when we fulfill the order. Okay, so here's what we're looking at here. We're looking at a split gateway, we're looking at start events, we're looking at two ending events, and we're looking at various activities that take place. So the BPM core elements are activities. What activities do is they capture a piece of work to be performed as part of a process. And of course, the start and the end events. Somehow seem to have gone past that. So the events represent process triggers, and they also represent outcomes. So we have process triggers, ones which begin the process, and then ones which end the process. And there are different types of events, so we'll see different types of events as we go. Okay, the other two main core elements are, of course, the gateway. The gateways are good for making paths fork out or branch out and follow different paths depending on some decision. And it's also good for joining paths to help with control flow. And again, different types of gateways, we'll talk about those as we go. The sequence flow is a simple arrow which connects activities and represents the order in which activities are performed. We can also assign conditions to sequence flows, but that becomes a little bit more complex. And again, we'll see that as we get into more complex business process models.
The Victorian Institute of Technology has other great videos covering many different topics. Please check them out, and thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe the video for more great content like this.